In 2020, the DC animated movie universe, based on the New 52 comics, came to an end with Justice League Apocalypse War, and DC started a new animated universe with the movie Superman Man of Tomorrow, which caused the new universe to be dubbed the Tomorrowverse. I had not been the biggest fan of the New 52 comics, and I did not enjoy the movies based on that universe as well, though I did like a few of them. That said, I was quite optimistic and looking forward to what this new universe had in store, and I was hoping it could have a broader range than restricting itself to a particular period of comics. Fast forward 4 years later, the Tomorrowverse is now 4 years old and 7 movies old, with the most recent movie, Justice League Crisis on Infinite Earths Part 1, coming out only a week ago, and the Tomorrowverse is scheduled to end after 2 more Crisis movies, and I'm honestly happy about that. The Tomorrowverse has been a disastrous, mediocre universe despite the rich potential it had, and the recent Crisis movie made me feel even more confident in my belief that this universe should be scrapped as soon as possible. I want to get into a few reasons why this universe ended up being such a huge disappointment for me, and I'll get into the individual movies and what I thought about it. But before I get into all of that, I want to talk about a common theme. Many people have repeatedly cited their problems with the animation style of the Tomorrowverse and that it seems lackluster, and I can certainly understand that. I have seen a lot of comparisons to the Archer show, and honestly, I find the animation boring too, though I don't find it as troubling and average as most people seem to do. I honestly kind of wish that we can get back to when DC movies had their own unique animated style based on the comics they were adapting, instead of being restricted to a singular animation style for an entire universe of movies. I thought those led to more unique animation styles, and they were honestly better to look at. Superman Man of Tomorrow kickstarted the Tomorrowverse, and I thought it was a solid watch. As far as Superman origin stories go, it didn't really offer anything special, even though it had some decent character moments. It was a pretty standard story featuring Clark's debut as Superman. The characterization was decent, and it featured characters like Lobo and Martian Manhunter, though that sadly happened at the cost of the spotlight for classic Superman characters like Lois Lane and more. Overall, I found the movie to be pretty underwhelming, but it was alright, I guess. I thought it was a decent way to kick everything off, and I was looking forward to more of it. The second movie was Justice Society World War II. I thought it was a really interesting decision to do a Justice Society movie as their second movie. I was quite happy to see an underrated team like the Justice Society, one of DC's original and often forgotten superhero team, get their own movie, even though I was disappointed by the choice to have characters like Wonder Woman, Barry Allen the Flash, and Aquaman as primary characters in the movie. This movie was not a great adaptation of the Justice Society, but I found it to be extremely enjoyable and I liked it for what it was. Despite its faults, it was a wonderful exhibition of the Justice Society, and I had a great time watching this movie. The 40s setting, the character dynamics, and the odd mix of characters added something special to the movie, even if the storyline itself was relatively simple. Black Canary stole the show in my opinion, and Jay Garrick the Flash and Hawkman had some standout moments as well. I do wish they could have featured more actual Justice Society members, and I really dislike some of the story decisions and character omissions. I feel like this is the kind of movie that Tomorrowverse could have used more of, just with better execution. Then we had the release of Batman The Long Halloween, and this came out in 2 parts. For the most part, this was 2 fine movies, and it was quite faithful to the original story, even though it made a few changes and suffered from pacing issues, especially with part 1. It maintained the mystery and the spirit of the original story, even though the animation felt extremely off compared to Tim Sale's artwork from the comics. The first part was extremely slow paced, and that led to the second part moving forward at an extremely fast pace. My biggest problem with these 2 movies were the removal of several important character moments, which I presume they did to streamline the story and focus mainly on the primary mystery. But I feel like the removal of those scenes hurt the movie, and it also made the primary relationship between Batman and Catwoman a bit awkward. I had a decent time watching these movies and I thought it did justice to the comics even though it made a few weird changes here and there. At this point, I thought the Tomorrowverse was chugging along decently. None of the movies had really wowed me, but they'd all been decent, enjoyable movies, and I thought the future had a lot of potential. I was glad to see original stories and new stories based on different eras of DC Comics, and I also really appreciated that they were spotlighting underused characters. And with characters like Green Arrow and Legion of Superheroes on the way, I really liked what I was seeing, and then the cracks started to show up for the Tomorrowverse in a very obvious manner. Green Lantern Beware My Power was the movie that really made it look like the Tomorrowverse had no proper idea what the hell they were doing. People were excited to finally have a new Green Lantern solo project after so long, and I honestly really wanted to enjoy this movie just for that, but it was utterly disappointing. The only good thing about the movie was Green Arrow's charming presence, and that was pretty much it. The movie attempted to mix together several DC storylines into one, and that led to a horrible, messy end product. Jon Stewart is the lead character of the movie, despite the movie basically telling a different version of Kyle Rayner's origin story as Green Lantern. They also tried to do Parallax Hal Jordan, and it was executed so badly and they failed miserably at it. The treatment of Sinestro was horrible as well. Overall, it was just a really mediocre story with awful characterization and story decisions. The only genuinely enjoyable things about this movie were the supporting characters like Green Arrow, Hawkgirl, and the Atom, and that was pretty much it. I had never been a huge fan of the Legion of Superheroes, but Supergirl was announced as the lead character for the movie, and I love Supergirl, so I was quite excited about it. From a Supergirl aspect, I was mostly satisfied with this movie. Kara was a charming, likable lead, and I loved how expressive she was in the movie. I think this movie is where the animation style truly shined, if you ask me, because in the other movies it just felt off or just kind of bad. But I don't want to get into too much into that. Her characterization was good, and I liked her arc of finding a place among the Legion, even though the execution was a bit lacking. Brainiac 5 was the other lead of the movie, and his chemistry and dynamic and the slow romantic relationship with they built up with Supergirl carried the movie, and that also brings up a problem with this movie. This movie spotlights different Legion characters, but it is firmly a Supergirl and Brainiac 5 movie, which was kind of disappointing. We did not get to see any of the prominent Legion characters. It was just Brainiac 5 and a bunch of rookies. It was a rare chance to showcase the Legion of Superheroes, a criminally underrated part of the DC universe, even though I have never been a huge part of it, and I think they really messed that up. Now, I like the movie a lot, mainly because of Supergirl and the fantastic dynamic she had with Brainiac 5, but I mean, overall, I'd say it was just a decent movie that mixes together a typical Supergirl storyline and a typical Brainiac 5 storyline. It is fun, but I feel like it could have been a lot better with a focus on the actual Legion of Superheroes and a deeper approach to Kara's trauma and mindset. Justice League Warworld was the first big team up movie of the Tomorrowverse. Firstly, this was not a Justice League movie at all, this was a DC Trinity movie. The trailers made that clear despite the title, and even despite that, I was quite excited about the prospect of a Trinity movie. But unfortunately, this movie was really average and completely wasted the potential of a DC Trinity movie. For two-thirds of the movie, we spent time with Wonder Woman, Batman, and Superman, all trapped in illusions. Wonder Woman was trapped in a world where she was a cowgirl, Batman was a barbarian, Superman was a secret agent. They were all interesting ideas and scenarios, but it just kind of felt pointless, even though it was cool to see these characters in these kind of unique situations, despite them not being in their right mind and not remembering who they actually were. The movie became a complete mess, especially after they woke up. Instead of highlighting the friendship between the Trinity, this movie made the inexplicable decision to imply that they were all from different timelines and that they were not the versions that each of them knew. As a result, we didn't get any meaningful, entertaining interactions between the DC Trinity. Again, Martian Manhunter and Lobo show up in this movie. Lobo gets some decent stuff, I guess, but Martian Manhunter is mostly just a plot device. It's also a confusing watch as it barely touches upon how the characters even got to Warworld. which is where the entire movie takes place. The third act is just a bunch of generic fight scenes before it ends with Warworld blowing up. And that's not it. Weirdly, the movie does not even provide a proper conclusion to the story or the characters, and it just abruptly ends with a teaser for a crisis movie. That ending literally came out of nowhere, and I thought it was absolutely bad. I can't help but think of this movie as a massive missed opportunity. This could have been a fantastic DC Trinity movie, capitalizing on their amazing dynamic and showcasing their iconic friendship, but sadly, it was nothing like that. The moment they announced a Crisis movie, I was apprehensive about it. The Tomorrowverse had barely started. We had not even gotten a proper Justice League story and did not even have any properly established teams or character dynamics so far, and I thought it was hilarious to attempt anything close to Crisis on Infinite Earths so soon. And then they announced that it was supposed to be 3 parts and also conclude the Tomorrowverse, and that is when I realized that they've basically just given up on this universe and were just going to scrap it. I honestly don't know whether it was the increasingly poor reception to these movies or the various behind the scenes shake-up for DC movies as a whole that forced them to do all this, but I was honestly okay with it. The Tomorrowverse had become a disappointment in my eyes despite the rich potential it had at the start of it, and they had made too many bad decisions for it to ever recover. I do appreciate the Tomorrowverse for spotlighting different unique characters, especially characters like Green Arrow and Black Canary who never showed up in the DCAMU. And the problem was they actually wasted it by never actually featuring the iconic relationship between these two characters. And that speaks to the overall problems with the Tomorrowverse. It had one or two good decisions coupled with five more bad decisions, and that ended up leading to several more missed opportunities. Anyways, coming down to the Crisis movie, I had no kind words to say about it even before it released. Everything about it made me think storyline for the sake of it. At that point, I was honestly just hoping for some cool cameos because I was already convinced that this was not gonna be good. And let's be honest, it's hard to care about an ending to a universe that had barely started and characters that I was barely attached to. Okay, before I continue, I just want to remind you guys that I'm going to be talking spoilers about this movie, so if you have not watched it, just beware of spoilers. I went into the Crisis movie with the lowest of expectations, but somehow it managed to be so much worse than I ever expected it to be. I genuinely have no idea what the hell this messy, confusing movie was trying to do, but it absolutely sucked. There were a couple of decisions that were absolutely infuriating and hilarious because of how stupid they were. The Harbinger reveal in particular came out of nowhere, and for a moment I couldn't believe that it was actually real. For some reason, they made Supergirl randomly Harbinger, and that's such a mind boggling decision that made no sense. They didn't even bother to actually explain it. I hope they do in the upcoming two movies, but it's still a really bad decision if you ask me. Just because something is surprising and is something new doesn't automatically make it good, and that's something a lot of people struggle to remember. This movie also features the formation of the Justice League because I guess it makes sense to do that in a Crisis on Infinite Earths movie. It's such an obviously bad idea that I have no idea how it happened. The lineup for the founding Justice League lineup also sucked because of the bad decisions they had made in previous movies. The movie also has a ton of cameos, which I was honestly looking forward to, but nothing was actually worth talking about because 90% of it is just static images meant for them to say, hey, look, everybody's here. We have so many different DC characters from so many different universes. We are spotlighting the multiverse. But it just nothing. It could have been something if it had been from previous DC universe we had and characters that we were actually attached towards, but I guess they couldn't actually do that, which sucked. I hope they at least do that in the upcoming two Crisis movies, but I'm not holding my breath about it after seeing what happened in the first movie. Characters like Hal Jordan and Wonder Woman were horribly treated and wasted. The characterization is genuinely awful for a lot of characters, even though it is pretty decent for the lead character, Barry Allen aka The Flash. I honestly don't have anything good to say about this movie. The entire movie is just a huge mess that tries to act far more complex than it really is. Also, this is supposed to be three parts, but I feel like we could have cut nearly half of the movie for the first part and it would have changed absolutely nothing. The funny thing about this movie is that I cannot recall the last time I actually struggled to finish a movie, much less a DC animated movie, but I really, really struggled to finish this movie. I think it took me like three times to actually finish this movie, and that kind of spoke to me about how much I could not care less about it. At this point, the Tomorrowverse is going to end in disaster, and after watching the Crisis movie, I feel pretty sure about that. I cannot help but consider Tomorrowverse to be a huge missed opportunity. It had all the potential to be a brand new era of DC Universe movies that could have highlighted several popular and underrated characters and found a proper balance that previous animated universes struggled to have, and slowly build up the interpersonal relationship between the characters and maybe one day end on a high note. But at a certain point, they just ended up making a lot of bad decisions that reflected poorly on them, and the movies were all pretty decent and nothing more. And this also ended up leading to even worse decisions that all culminated in the awful Crisis movie. I don't think the final two parts are going to change my opinions about the Tomorrowverse as a whole, and I don't think that they will do anything in those final two parts that are going to drastically alter my opinions or change everything we have seen about it. I just hope that when the Tomorrowverse comes to an end, I hope they start doing some standalone movies adapting iconic DC storylines with unique animation styles before attempting to do another new DC animated universe. Okay, that's all I have for this video. I hope you liked it, and I thought it was a good idea to dig into the Tomorrowverse, considering it's going to come to an end by the end of this year, I hope, or at least I think that's the plan for now. Thanks for watching. Goodbye.